They slammed the gates in my face 15 years ago, leaving a girl shivering in the dark. Now, those very same rust-eaten gates swing open, deferentially, for a car worth more than their entire crumbling legacy. They won't recognize the girl they ruined, but they're about to learn to fear the woman she became. The limousine whispered along the gravel drive, its tires crunching invasively on stones that hadn't felt such expensive rubber in years. Outside my tinted window, Blackwood Manor loomed, less a stately home and more a monument to stubborn decay. 15 years. A lifetime ago I'd been cast out from this place, a frightened 17-year-old girl swallowed by the night. Now, the afternoon sun glinted off the obsidian sheen of the car, a stark contrast to the manor's weathered gray stone, stained with streaks of damp that looked like tears frozen mid-fall. The wrought iron gates, ornate swirls of rusting metal, depicting faded Blackwood griffins, groaned open with painful reluctance, as if protesting the arrival of someone they'd long forgotten, or perhaps someone they'd hoped would stay forgotten. My driver, a silent professional named Anton, whose discretion cost more than this entire estate was likely worth now, navigated the entrance with practiced ease. I leaned back against the cool leather, my own reflection a faint ghost in the tinted glass. The tailored lines of my charcoal gray suit, the understated pearl earrings, the severe knot of my dark hair. Armor. Every piece meticulously chosen. Beneath the silk blouse, my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a traitorous counterpoint to the icy calm I projected. This house, it breathed resentment. I could feel it seeping through the climate-controlled air of the car, a familiar chill that had nothing to do with the April weather. The gardens were a tragedy. Grandfather, Arthur Blackwood, had adored them. He'd spent hours among the roses, his weathered hands tending to blooms with a gentleness he rarely showed indoors. Now, weeds choked the flower beds, vines strangled the ornamental statues, and the once proud topiaries slumped like defeated soldiers. It mirrored the state of the family fortune, I suspected. Grandeur left untended inevitably rots. We pulled to a stop before the imposing oak front doors, scarred and faded. Anton remained impassive, awaiting my signal. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the air tasting metallic, like old blood or pennies. 15 years of rebuilding myself, brick by painful brick, had led to this moment. 15 years of turning betrayal into fuel, loneliness into resolve. 15 years of whispered promises to myself in cramped apartments and sterile boardrooms. They threw you out like garbage, Elara. The old voice, the ghost of the weeping girl, whispered in the back of my mind. They called you a thief. They watched you break. Yes, I answered silently, my hand tightening on the sleek portfolio resting on my lap. And now I've come to collect the debt. I remembered the weight of the threadbare backpack digging into my shoulders, the icy finality in Grandmother Eleanor's eyes, the triumphant smirk on my cousin Marcus's face as the gate slammed shut, leaving me utterly alone under a sky devoid of stars. The chill of that night felt suddenly present, prickling my skin despite the expensive wool of my suit. "Wait here, Anton," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil within. He simply inclined his head. My hand rested on the cool metal of the door handle. Pushing it down felt like breaking a seal, stepping across a threshold not just into a house, but back into the suffocating atmosphere of my past. The click echoed loudly in the sudden stillness. Time to face the ghosts. Time to show them what the girl they discarded had become. My heels clicked sharply on the flagstone path, each step a declaration. The heavy oak door loomed before me, silent, waiting. The air inside Blackwood Manor hit me first, a cloying mix of lemon oil polish struggling to mask the pervasive scent of dust, damp, and something else, decay. Not just physical, but moral. The grand hall, once impressive with its soaring ceiling and checkered marble floor, felt diminished, the shadows clinging stubbornly to the corners despite the afternoon light filtering through the tall, grimy windows. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams like tiny, indifferent spirits. My entrance caused barely a ripple at first. Muffled voices drifted from the drawing room to my right, the heavy double doors slightly ajar. The droning, monotonous tone belonged to Mr. Abernathy, the family solicitor, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with weary disapproval. He'd been old 15 years ago. Now he sounded ancient, his words barely disturbing the thick, stagnant air. I walked towards the sound, my footsteps unnervingly loud on the parquet flooring leading off the marble hall. Each click of my heels seemed to bounce off the high ceilings, announcing my unwanted presence. I paused just outside the drawing room door, listening. "Significant liabilities outstanding," Abernathy was saying, his voice dry as parchment. "The offers received for the remaining assets, including the energy division shares, are substantially below initial projections. Liquidity is critical if the estate is to avoid—" I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. Silence. Fell instantly. It wasn't a peaceful silence, but a sharp, jagged one, thick with shock and disbelief. 5 pairs of eyes swiveled towards me. They were clustered around the long mahogany table, littered with papers and half-empty teacups. Uncle James, his face, florid and puffier than I remembered, veins standing out on his temples, glared at me as if I were an unwelcome stain on his antique carpet. His hand, clutching a crystal tumbler half filled with amber liquid, even in the afternoon, some things never changed, tightened. Beside him, Aunt Miriam gasped audibly, a hand flying to the pearls clasped tightly around her thin neck. Her face, always sharp and bird-like, seemed even more pinched, her skin pale and papery. She looked older, yes, but the avarice in her eyes was timeless. Marcus, my cousin, lounging back in his chair with an air of bored entitlement, blinked slowly. The smug smirk I remembered was still there, lurking beneath a veneer of bland adulthood, but confusion clouded his features. He looked me up and down, recognition dawning slowly, mingled with irritation. Mr. Abernathy paused mid-sentence, his spectacles slipping down his nose, his mouth slightly agape. And then there was Grandmother Eleanor, seated at the head of the table, ramrod straight, despite her evident age, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. Time had etched deeper lines around her eyes and mouth, but the eyes themselves were unchanged, chips of glacial ice, sharp and assessing. She didn't gasp or sputter. She simply stared, her gaze pinning me like an insect under glass. A flicker of something, surprise, annoyance, crossed her features before being instantly suppressed, replaced by that familiar mask of imperious control. "Elara?" Uncle James finally sputtered, pushing his chair back noisily. "What in the blazes are you doing here? This is a private meeting. Security! Abernathy, call security!" Aunt Miriam recovered enough to echo him, her voice, thin and reedy. "You have no right. After what you did, after the disgrace." I let their initial salvo wash over me, maintaining eye contact with Grandmother Eleanor. The frightened girl who would have flinched and stammered denials was long gone. In her place stood someone they didn't recognize, someone forged in the fires they'd lit. "Security?" I asked, my voice quiet, calm, cutting through their agitation. I allowed a small, humorless smile to touch my lips. "I hardly think that will be necessary, Uncle." I took another step into the room, the scent of stale cigar smoke and old money clinging to the heavy velvet curtains. My gaze swept over the familiar furnishings, the threadbare patches on the Persian rug, the tarnished silver frame holding a faded photograph of Grandfather, the faint water ring on the side table, where I'd once spilled lemonade and been scolded for an hour. Memories, sharp and unwelcome, pricked at me. "You are not welcome here, Elara," Grandmother Eleanor stated, her voice low but carrying absolute authority. It was the same tone she'd used 15 years ago. "Leave at once." I don't think so, grandmother, I replied, my voice still even. I walked further towards the table, placing my sleek leather portfolio down with a soft, definitive thud. The sound seemed to make them all jump. You seem to be discussing the precarious state of the Blackwood legacy, dwindling assets, outstanding debts, the potential fire sale of grandfather's company. I let the words hang in the air. It seems my timing is impeccable. Uncle James surged to his feet. How dare you? How could you possibly know? Anything about our private affairs? Aunt Miriam clutched his arm. James, don't. She's trying to provoke you. Marcus finally spoke, his voice laced with the old arrogance. Still playing games, Elara. Run off back to whatever gutter you crawled out of. Nobody wants you here. I ignored them all, my focus solely on the matriarch. Knowledge is power. Grandmother, surely you taught me that. Or perhaps, I tilted my head slightly. It was one of the lessons I had to learn for myself, out in the cold. The air crackled with unspoken history, with the weight of 15 years of silence and bitterness. They stared at me, this apparition from the past, dressed in success they couldn't comprehend, speaking with an assurance that unnerved them. The balance of power in the room had shifted, and the tremor of that shift was just beginning to register. On their faces, they didn't know who I was anymore, but they were about to find out. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Uncle James stood frozen, halfway between outrage and confusion. Aunt Miriam chewed nervously on her lower lip, her eyes darting between me and her husband. Marcus's smirk had completely vanished, replaced by a wary frown. Only Grandmother Eleanor held my gaze, her icy composure unwavering, though I saw the faint, almost imperceptible tightening around her mouth. She was calculating, assessing this unexpected variable. You always were insolent, she said finally. Her voice clipped. Success, it seems, hasn't improved your manners. Perhaps not, I conceded smoothly, but it has afforded me certain insights. I gestured towards the papers scattered across the table. Insights into just how badly Blackwood Industries is hemorrhaging money. Insights into the multiple creditors circling. Insights into the rather desperate offer made for the energy division, the only part of grandfather's company still worth anything. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat nervously, shuffling his papers. Miss Vance, perhaps this discussion would be better held at another time. Vance? Uncle James barked, latching onto the name. Who the devil is Vance? My mother's name, I replied coolly. The name I took back when I stopped being the Blackwood family's scapegoat. And then, I let the memory surface. Not as a weapon yet, but as a foundation for what was coming. I let myself feel the phantom sting of tears, the burning humiliation as Aunt Miriam produced that pawn ticket with a triumphant flourish. Flashback, the chill of the library. Grandfather barely gone a month. Aunt Miriam's voice dripping with false sympathy. Eleanor James. I found this tucked under Elara's mattress. The small, crumpled ticket falling onto the polished table. My own voice, high-pitched, desperate. No, I didn't. It wasn't me. Uncle James's immediate condemnation. Just like her mother. Always trouble. Marcus's barely concealed snigger. And Grandmother Eleanor, looking not at me, but at the ticket. Then at James, a silent, cold agreement passing between them. Her final words, echoing in the vast emptiness. We cannot tolerate a thief. Pack your things. The memory brought a familiar ache, but it no longer had the power to cripple me. It was merely data now, filed under motivation. I brought myself back to the present, my voice regaining its sharp edge. You're wondering how I know about your financial predicament, Uncle James, about the offer for the energy division. I paused, letting the question hang, enjoying the flicker of unease in their eyes. They thought I'd gleaned gossip, perhaps bribed a disgruntled employee. The truth was far more fundamental. The lead acquisition offer? The one deemed most promising, despite being insultingly low, according to Abernathy's notes there. I nodded towards the papers. The international conglomerate showing sudden interest in salvaging what's left of Blackwood Energy stepped closer to the table, leaning forward slightly, my voice dropping to a confidential, almost conspiratorial tone, ensuring every single person in the room heard me clearly. "That company," I said, straightening up, my eyes sweeping across, their stunned faces, "is mine." I let the words settle. 4 words that detonated the carefully constructed reality of their world. Origen Tech, I stated, the name crisp and definitive. "Perhaps you've heard of it? We're rather significant players in the sustainable energy sector globally." I watched the dawning comprehension, the slow, agonizing process of connecting the dots, the discarded granddaughter, the mysterious, powerful corporation. Uncle James staggered back, his face draining of color, his hand instinctively going to his chest. "No, it can't be." Aunt Miriam let out a strangled whimper, sinking back into her chair as if her legs could no longer support her. Her eyes were wide with disbelief and something else, dawning horror. Marcus stared, his mouth agape, the arrogant certainty completely shattered, leaving only raw panic. He looked younger suddenly, stripped bare of his entitlement. Mr. Abernathy dropped his pen. It rolled across the table with a small clatter, the only sound in the room for a long moment. Finally, I looked at Grandmother Eleanor. The mask had cracked. For the first time in my memory, her icy control faltered. Her skin seemed translucent, her lips bloodless. The glacial blue eyes held not anger, not dismissal, but stark, undisguised fear. The kind of fear reserved for forces you cannot comprehend or control. "And the mortgage on this manor," I continued, my voice relentless, pressing the advantage. "The one the bank was threatening to foreclose on after your series of unfortunate investments, Uncle? Origen's private equity division acquired that debt portfolio last quarter, which means," I allowed another deliberate pause, letting the final implication land, "that I effectively own this house too." The disgraced girl they'd cast out 15 years ago hadn't just returned successful. She'd returned as their potential savior, their potential executioner, and the owner of the very ground beneath their feet. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted. It had been utterly, terrifyingly reversed. And judging by the sheer terror reflecting in their eyes, they knew it. Sometimes the most chilling justice isn't a shout, but the deafening silence when the tables are turned so completely. It's the quiet arrival of consequences they never saw coming, delivered by the very person they cast aside. What moment made? You cheer for Elara the most? Was it her entrance? The company reveal? Exposing the lie about the watch? Tell me your favorite moment down in the comments section.